You love the insects in your garden. Maybe you have never said that out loud. Maybe you would not have described it that way until just now. But if you have been watching this channel, if you have stepped outside on a May evening and listened for that hum, if you have ever held out your hand and waited, then yes, you love them. And there is something nobody told you. Some of what you have been putting in your garden, things that seem harmless, things that are sold specifically for gardens, things that well-meaning people recommend in every gardening group and on every packet of instructions, is hurting them. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, consistently, in ways that do not show up until the evening is quiet and you cannot remember the last time you heard something flying through the dark. This video exists because you deserve to know. Welcome to the beetle mystery. Today we're going through 7 things that people commonly put in or near their gardens that are causing real harm to the insects they have come to care about. Some of these will surprise you. One of them is something almost every gardener has done this season, and all of them are completely avoidable once you understand what is actually happening. Stay until the end, because the last one is the most common mistake of all, and it is the one that costs insects their lives every single year, while the person responsible never finds out why. 1. Systemic pesticides. And the problem is not what you think it is. This is the one that feels the most complicated, because you are not trying to kill the insects you love. You are trying to kill the ones you did not want. The aphids on the roses, the grubs on the lawn, the mosquitoes near the patio. And the product you use promised to handle exactly that. Here is what the label did not tell you. Systemic pesticides, particularly the class called neonicotinoids, do not stay where you put them. They are taken up by the roots of treated plants and distributed through every part of the plant's tissue. The leaves, the stems, the flowers, the nectar, the pollen. Every part of the plant becomes a delivery system for the chemical you applied to the soil weeks or months ago. A bee visiting a flower on a plant treated with a systemic neonicotinoid does not encounter a lethal dose. It encounters a sublethal dose. And sublethal, researchers discovered, does not mean harmless. Research published in the journal Science found that sublethal neonicotinoid exposure in bumblebees impairs navigation, reduces foraging efficiency, disrupts the learning behavior that bees use to find and return to food sources, and reduces reproductive success in the colony. The bee does not die immediately. It becomes less capable, less oriented, less able to do the things that keep it and its colony alive. For May beetles, whose larvae live in the soil for 3 to 4 years, absorbing whatever chemistry exists in the ground around them, systemic soil treatments represent years of accumulated exposure during the most vulnerable period of their development. The product worked exactly as advertised. The damage it caused was simply invisible, distributed across species you were not targeting, delayed by months or years, and never connected to the quiet evenings that followed. Check every product you use in your garden for neonicotinoid active ingredients. Imidacloprid, clothianidin, thimethoxam, acetamiprid. If any of these appear on the label of something you have applied to your soil or your plants this year, the insects in your garden have already been affected. The question now is what you do next. 2. Slug pellets, and the chain they set in motion. This one appears most often in the gardens of people who genuinely care about their plants and genuinely care about wildlife, and who have never been told that these two things are, in the case of conventional slug pellets, in direct conflict. The most widely used slug pellets contain metaldehyde or iron phosphate as their active ingredient. Metaldehyde is acutely toxic to a wide range of invertebrates, not just slugs. Ground beetles, which are among the most important predatory insects in a garden ecosystem, consuming enormous quantities of pest insects, slugs, and their eggs, are killed by metaldehyde exposure at the concentrations present in standard pellet applications. When you remove the ground beetles from your garden, you remove the garden's own pest control system. The slug problem that the pellets were solving returns worse than before because the natural regulation that kept it in check is gone. But the chain does not stop with ground beetles. Fireflies, whose larvae are predatory and feed on slugs and other soft-bodied invertebrates in the soil, are directly affected by both the chemical itself and by the removal of the prey base they depend on. Research on firefly population decline has consistently identified pesticide use, including molluscicides, as a significant contributing factor. The slug pellets you scattered along the border last spring did not just kill slugs. They disrupted a food web that extended from the soil surface to the creatures you most wanted to see on summer evenings. If slugs are a genuine problem, copper tape around vulnerable plants, crushed eggshells, encouraging hedgehogs, and beer traps are all effective alternatives that do not cascade through the food web of your garden. The slug problem is real. The solution does not have to cost the insects you love. 3. Weed killer on paths and borders, and what lives in the soil it reaches. This one circulates everywhere in garden advice. Spray the path. Keep the edges tidy. A clean border is a sign of care and pride. For the insects living in the soil beneath that path and along those edges, it is something else entirely. Glyphosate, the most widely used herbicide in residential gardens, does not stay on the surface of the plants it kills. Research has documented that glyphosate persists in soil for weeks to months after application, with some studies finding residues present for significantly longer in certain soil types. During that persistence period, it is bioavailable to soil organisms, including the larvae of beetles, the pupae of butterflies, and the developing stages of dozens of insect species that spend part of their life cycle in the soil. But the effect that researchers have documented most consistently is indirect. Glyphosate eliminates the plant diversity of treated areas completely. Weeds, which is to say wildflowers that humans have decided are unwanted, are frequently the primary or only food source for specific insect species. The common dandelion, eliminated from millions of garden paths and borders every year, is one of the earliest and most important nectar sources for queen bumblebees emerging from winter dormancy before most garden flowers are open. When you spray the dandelions on your path in March, you are removing food from a queen bumblebee at the moment when she is most vulnerable, most hungry, and most critical to the survival of an entire colony that does not yet exist. Leave one corner of your path unsprayed. Leave the dandelions along one edge. What looks like untidiness to a neighbor is a meal to a queen that has been underground since October. 4. Artificial lighting left on all night, and the insects it traps. This one is the hardest for people to connect to insect harm because it does not involve any chemical, any product, any deliberate intervention. It is simply light, and light, surely, cannot be the problem. It is the problem, and the research documenting this has been accumulating for 2 decades to the point where it is no longer seriously disputed in the scientific literature. Insects navigate by light, specifically by the gradient and direction of natural light sources, primarily the moon and the polarized light of the sky. When artificial lights are introduced into this system, they do not simply add illumination. They corrupt the navigational information that insects depend on to find mates, to locate food sources, to return to nesting sites, to complete the mating flights that are the entire purpose of their adult lives. A moth drawn to a garden light and trapped circling it for hours is not just inconvenienced. It is failing to mate. It is burning energy reserves that were meant for reproduction. It is exposed to predators that have learned to hunt near artificial lights. It may circle until dawn and then be taken by a bird or die of exhaustion. 4. May beetles specifically, whose mating flights happen in a narrow window of a few warm evenings in May. Artificial lights can disrupt the navigation of the entire local population during the only weeks that matter for the continuation of the next generation. A motion-activated light, a timer that turns off garden lighting by midnight, or the replacement of cool white bulbs with warm amber ones, all significantly reduce the impact on navigating insects. The light you leave on all night because it feels safer or more welcoming is, from the perspective of the creatures navigating your garden in the dark, a trap. Turn it off at midnight. The garden will be fine. The insects need the dark. 5. Peat-based compost, and the habitat it destroyed before it reached your garden. This one is less immediate than a pesticide or a light. It is more diffuse, more structural, and for that reason more difficult to connect to the quiet evenings and the absence of humming that you may have noticed without knowing what to name. Peat is extracted from peatland bogs, some of the oldest and most ecologically rich habitats on Earth. A peat bog that took 10,000 years to form can be extracted in decades. And the insects that evolved in and around those bogs, the species that are found nowhere else, the populations that have no alternative habitat to retreat to, do not survive the extraction. You did not mine the peat. You bought a bag of compost from a garden center. The connection between that bag and the destruction of a specific habitat in a specific place is real, but invisible, which is exactly why it has continued for so long, without the people at the end of the supply chain understanding what they were participating in. Peat-free compost is now widely available and performs comparably to peat-based products for almost all garden applications. The difference in price is small. The difference in what that choice represents is not. Check the compost you are currently using. If it contains peat, switch when the bag is empty. It is one of the simplest changes available to a gardener who has understood what is at stake. And it is the kind of change that accumulates quietly across millions of gardens and is something that matters at the scale where insects actually live. 6. Perfectly timed and perfectly applied fertilizer. And what it does to the plant relationships insects depend on. This one will surprise you, because it involves doing something correctly, following the instructions, applying the product at the right rate at the right time, and still causing harm that no instruction label will warn you about. High-nitrogen fertilizers, applied to garden soil to promote lush growth, do exactly what they promise. Plants grow faster, greener, larger. The results are visible and satisfying. But the chemistry of rapid, nitrogen-driven growth changes the plant in ways that the insects visiting it can detect and respond to. Research on plant-insect interactions has found that plants grown under high nitrogen fertilization produce leaves and flowers with altered nutritional profiles, specifically higher nitrogen content, but lower concentrations of the secondary compounds, flavonoids, terpenes, and other phytochemicals that insects use to assess plant quality that caterpillars require for development, and that give flowers their specific scent signatures. A rose grown on high nitrogen fertilizer smells different to a bee than a rose grown in unfertilized soil. The difference is not random. It is the difference between a chemical signal that says, "Come here, this is what you need," and one that says something is different, something that evolved over millions of years of co-development between plant and insect has been altered. Some specialist insects, species that have evolved to use specific plants and no others, cannot make this adjustment. They pass the altered plant by. They find less. They reproduce less. Over seasons, the population shifts. Use fertilizer sparingly. Let soil biology do as much of the work as possible. A garden that feeds its soil with compost and leaf matter rather than synthetic fertilizer will produce plants that smell and taste to insects the way those plants were always supposed to smell and taste. 7. Stopping. Letting the garden go in autumn and not coming back until spring. I saved this one for last because it is the most common of all, and because it is the one that costs insects their lives every year while the person responsible never finds out why. Every autumn, millions of gardeners across Europe and North America cut back their gardens. The dead stems are removed. The seed heads are cleared. The leaves are raked and bagged. The borders are tidied into bare soil that will look clean and ready when spring comes. And then the gardener goes inside and does not come back until March. Here is what is happening in the garden during those months. The hollow stems of last year's plants are the hibernation sites of solitary bees. Species like the red mason bee and the leafcutter bee do not live in colonies. They cannot retreat to a warm hive. They seal themselves into hollow stems in autumn and wait for spring inside the stem you removed in October. The leaf litter beneath your shrubs contains the pupae of beetles, the overwintering eggs of lacewings, the hibernating adults of species that need the insulation of decomposing leaves to survive temperatures that bare soil cannot protect them from. The seed heads of flowers that you cleared in November contain the food that finches were going to eat in January, and the perches that overwintering insects were going to cling to in February. The tidy garden that you are proud of in March is, to the insects that try to survive in it, a landscape that was stripped of everything they needed at the exact moment they needed it most. Leave the stems until April. Leave the leaves under the shrubs all winter. Leave the seed heads until you can see new growth beginning at the base of the plant. The garden will not look wild. It will look like a garden that understands what it is for. And on the first warm evening of May, when you step outside and something heavy and humming lifts from the border where you did not cut back, where you left the stems and let the leaves lie, you will understand in your body what no instruction label ever managed to tell you. The garden was never just yours. It was always theirs too. And what you do in November determines what comes back in May. You did not know all of these things. That is exactly why this video exists. The good news is that every single one of these mistakes is fixable. Today, right now, you do not need new equipment or expensive products. You need information. And now you have it. Tell me in the comments which one surprised you most. And if you have made one of these mistakes, I promise almost everyone watching this has. The difference between the gardener you were before this video and the gardener you are after is simply knowing. And now you know. Share this with someone who has a garden and loves the creatures in it. Because the insects in their garden are counting on someone telling them. I will see you in the next mystery. The beetle mystery.